Hello, and welcome to the Empowered Learning Podcast. This is your host, Andy Bennetts. On today's episode, we welcome Dee Larsen. Dee is a dear friend of mine and gave me my start in the world of educational technology. She currently serves as the Regional Account Executive for the 95% Group. She has served in the education space for over 20 years, much of that as the owner of Master Tech Solutions. Dee is passionate about equipping and empowering educators with essential reading, writing, and learning tools. Welcome, Dee.
Hey, Dee, how are you?
Hey, Andy, I'm doing great. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. It's good to see you too. When I first thought about doing this podcast, I was kind of racking my brain, and I didn't have to rack my brain very hard to come up with like you and Steve and like all these people that were just kind of instrumental into starting my second career, right? I was always envisioned that I was going to be a teacher and an administrator for the rest of my life. And about 8 years into that, I was like, maybe there's a different journey here. And you and Steve were really kind of the catalyst to kind of get me set on this new career. So it's so fun to reconnect with you. We chatted a little bit before we hit record, but it's great to see you. And thank you so much for giving me a few minutes of your time to chat with me.
Love it. And I'm so pleased to have been just a little part of your journey. It's really gratifying to see how well you've done. And I'm just thrilled to be a part of it. And you were right. You still are an educator and you're still an administrator. It's just in a different way than you thought.
Yep, exactly right. Exactly right. So for all of the Empowered Learning Podcast listeners, tell us a little bit about yourself, Dee, and kind of upbringing, and then kind of your journey. I'm not sure if it was winding or not, but just your journey to the point where you are now, working in the education space as a leader.
It's funny that you bring up the word winding because I don't need a bio very often. So writing one for you, that's exactly what I wrote. Was my path to working with education was a long and winding one, because it really was, even though, I grew up way out in the country, Northeastern Ohio, an actress and a singer, and, really active in a lot of things. I had no like goals of being a teacher. I wanted to be the next Barbara Streisand. So, I went to Youngstown State in education because I thought, well, if I have to go, I'm sure not going to major in vocal music because that's opera, right?
Yeah, right.
I had no interest in that. So I majored in music, but in vocal music. I just didn't take the opera track. And it's interesting. I did take it, the main track was for education, but even as I was going through my schooling, I kind of knew I don't think I'm ever going to end up in a classroom. It's just not how I'm built to be in one place every day, the same people all day long. And it's interesting because then I ended up not going into education, and I was really a worship leader. I was on staff at a big church in Colorado for a long time. And that's where I guess my skills with writing and speaking and presenting kind of came out. And it was really because of my sweet husband, Dan, that I got involved in any of this.
We love Dan.
We love Dan. He's a good man.
He is a good guy.
Yeah,
so tell us about that. How did Dan get you back into this? You were going along the education route, then you're like, no, music, and then Dan. So continue your winding story.
Yeah, Dan's a CPA, and one of his clients bought a lot of technology. So as he was working through all of his books, and one day he just said, "Eric, what do you do?" And he began to tell him, well, I deliver professional development, and I make this much a day. And boy, my CPA husband's brain is going, wow, my wife is a master at speaking and writing and presenting. Gee, if she could make that even one day a month, what a blessing that would be.
Sure.
And it took me a long time to consider going that route instead of staying along the path, because I loved writing Bible studies. I love teaching Bible studies. I love the music part of it, but I did feel a tug. And of course, then I dove in both feet and head first, which is never a comfortable position,
No.
but I got it under my belt. And little did I know that I was really going to be selling. And if there was anything in life most people do not want to be, it's a salesperson.
It's very true.
Yeah, it's true. It's, you know, because they have the picture of the used car salesman.
Yep.
But once I began working with educators and developing professional development and seeing the impact I had, and I also had a real passion for reading. I mean, it was something that I always believed in a lot and felt that, you know, if a child doesn't learn to read, they really can't do anything else.
Very true. Very true.
So that I was really encouraged in that, and I went along that route for about 10 years until a president and friend, a former president of a company that actually you and I repped for at one time, he called me and said, I desperately need your skills.
Okay.
And it's for a language arts company.
Oh, nice.
And you know, I wasn't interested.
Oh, really?
Because I was too busy. Well, I was just too busy already.
Right.
And he said, I will pay for you to come to Columbus and sit in our sales meeting and just learn about it. And if you know, if you're interested, you know, you can just be an independent rep. And I just was like, not real excited to go to Columbus, other than the fact that I could go visit my mom who lived up in Northeastern Ohio. But you know, Andy, it's interesting how you kind of knew that maybe there was a different route.
Right.
I think the moment that I was sitting there and I began to see the impact that we could have, not just in language arts, but because the literacy in this country is abysmal.
Yeah.
I felt a longing to kind of put my skills toward that.
There you go.
And that's when I really began the deep work of understanding how our brain created and how they go about the very difficult work of wiring themselves to be able to read.
Okay.
And that is my passion. I mean, not above all else, but it is definitely the motivator every day when I get up. I can't wait to help an educator understand that we weren't born with the skill to read. We're born with language,
right,
but not with the reading skill.
Interesting. We'll have to come back to that because that is a super interesting take that as a former educator, that's definitely not something that is taught in college, right? One would think that would be a pretty important aspect to teach a young teacher that's going to be teaching how to read, that this is not a natural thing, that there's more to that. So let's come back to that.
Yes.
You had mentioned the idea that sales is not a career that most people would want to come into. I think, and it's interesting because I've talked to Steve, I've talked to Luke, I've talked to you, a few other people. It's either a begrudging kind of kicking and screaming experience, or just a dragging your feet of like, I guess I'll give it a shot. You know, either A, because I can make some good money on it, or, you know, we'll just give it a shot. But I would love to hear what was your aha moment of like, this is not about me pushing something on somebody. This is more about me consulting and partnering with them, because that, and I'm still, I guess from time to time, I still need to work through that as my educator heart, because it's kind of an us versus them, which is definitely not the last thing you want to experience. But it took me as an educator a long time to just own the fact that yes, I sell things, but that is not my identity. My identity is to empower. Hey, looky there, empower educators, right? To do their job better in a more efficient way, or with tools that engage students. So tell me about your experience of that flipping the switch of like, this is not something I'm going to, you know, begrudgingly come into, but this is something I'm going to own, and I'm going to make it my own because I am passionate about that.
Well, you know, I wouldn't say that it happened within the first year or
Sure.
maybe even first 5 years, because still, you know, if you do endeavor to take on something brand new. There are struggles, there are skills you need to pick up. You have to hone other skills like speaking, writing, presenting.
Yep.
You can't just get up every time and present the same way. There's always something that can be corrected. But I think what I realized inside of myself early on was that I'm not a sales person. I am here to help them see another way to accomplish what they want to do in the classroom or in their school or their district that could be more effective. And Andy, you yourself will relate to that feeling of working very hard, putting in a lot of hours, you know, nights, weekends, summers, to meet the needs of those kids. And sometimes you can't. There are some kids you weren't able to move. And there may not have been tier 2 or 3 supports to really help them make the gains that today we know they can. And that frustration of teachers who work so hard and feel sad because still half their class can't read. That is, I guess in the last 10 years, that's when not only the acceptance of, you know, I don't mind saying I'm in sales. I help people understand how to help more of their children learn to read proficiently. It's okay, but it's okay to do that because I know that at the end of the day, as I'm building relationships with all kinds of people everywhere, maybe they will see the opportunity to be able to do something a lot more effectively or a little, but I know ways that we can make them a lot more effective. You know, I got to tell you this. We both have a couple of boys. Mine are in their 20s, pretty grown, but you'll probably relate to this. When they were teenagers and were standing in the line at the grocery store, they would hate the fact that I was always talking to someone. And one day I pulled them aside and I said, listen, you should be really thankful because mom makes a lot of money making friends in 12 states.
That's very true. It's very true. Yeah.
That's another way to be thankful for your career is if you can do well.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, that's definitely a running gag with my family is that, you know, no one likes to go to the store with dad because he ends up talking to half the store. It's what we do. And it's not a sales thing. It's just, that's just how we're wired. We like to talk to people and converse, which is why podcast is a beautiful opportunity to just talk with awesome people and just have fun conversations. So, we're going to come back to literacy just because I know that, like you said, that is your passion. And that's where really since we parted ways, you kind of went the literacy route. I kind of went with Steve in interactive learning on the GRTC side and stuck on the technology, but still making an impact in our own, in our own ways, in our own spaces. Tell me a little bit. This is purely for my own benefit here. Tell me a little bit about the creation of Master Tech Solutions, kind of the progression from that. You probably haven't heard that name in a while, right? Some things that you learned along the way, and teams, and just what was the genesis of that, and kind of what were some life lessons that you learned in starting up Master Tech Solutions, growing it, and then kind of pivoting to something else.
Oh, great question. And by the way, I did put that into my little bio.
Okay, good.
Because,
I made it.
It's something I was really proud of that, starting as an independent rep, the phrase that we eat what we kill. When you're independent, there's no salary, there's no benefits. You're out there really, and again, this is where sometimes sales, you can feel a bit of a panic because you have bills that need to be paid. So you do have to sell something in order to get paid. But to maintain that balance is what we're all striving for. And when I started, all of us, I found out that I could do this job. Like I was really good at it, and people, thank you. People were benefiting from it. And as I was making money, of course, I have a CPA right in my home.
There you go.
Said, it's going to be really important. I can see you're going to be successful. You're going to need to either have an LLC or what he would recommend is a C Corp. And you're going to really need to have a business entity, because I did intend to make a success of it and really build it. So in the first, I would say 2 years, really, it was just me, myself, and I going all over Colorado and Wyoming and spreading the good news of how to be more effective. And then my husband was not really a speaker or a salesperson, but he had such a desire really to kind of see what I was doing and be a support. And that's who he is. He has the gift of helps. And he also worked in a job that, like, he was really worried they were just going to find him dead on his desk one day because the stress was so much.
Wow.
And I said, you know what? I'm doing really well and I need help desperately. Why don't you quit your job and come work with me? So now that presents a whole new set of challenges when you are your husband's boss. But I have to say, and also it presented a challenge because, as I mentioned, Dan wasn't naturally a speaker or a teacher. That wasn't, he was always a behind the scenes sort of person. But I have to give him such praise and just really congratulate him, because it's not easy to humble yourself and listen to someone else. And sometimes as a man or a husband with your wife, or with a woman boss, a female boss. But he did, he listened to me, and I would kind of let him do a little presenting. I would, put him out there, and then I could help mentor him. That was really how we grew so much. We found that we worked together beautifully. As a matter of fact, I would go and have those initial conversations and maybe make an initial sale. But part of what we provided, as you know, at MasterTech was professional learning. And that was some of what I really enjoyed doing, was writing professional learning and delivering that. But Dan really got good at it. And he's also especially good with technology. So when he went in and worked with teachers, most of whom are females, so they enjoyed having a good-looking guy helping them out. So that was an advantage. But it would be so amazing that he'd go in to do that PD, and he'd be able to say, you realize that we actually have this over here that would help you with that problem? And he never did it in a salesy way. He was literally there to help them solve a problem. And that's really how we grew. We found our niche.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Well, Crystal and I, my wife, are kind of in just beginning stages of that same process, where, owning the company now, she's now working for me and with me, and we're actually going to go to a conference in Denver in a couple of weeks where we're going to be kind of side by side, which is, I think we're both excited for it, but also a little nervous just because it's a new dynamic, and we'll see if Crystal ever watches this one. I love you, babe. But I mean, there's definitely some similarities, right? I mean, that's it's kind of an opposites attract. Like, I'm the people person, she's kind of the behind the scenes. So I see a lot of similarities between her skill set and her heart and Dan's. So it's what I'm trying to do is in that process is to give her a little bit more confidence. I think she doesn't believe in herself maybe as much as I do. And I think that sometimes that stretching and that maybe getting yourself out of your own comfort zone a little bit can hopefully, this is my grand scheme, is to maybe build a little bit of confidence in her, because she is a phenomenal, wonderful person that has so much talent and so much amazing abilities inside her. And this hopefully is going to help us to grow together, help us grow the business, but also just give her a little bit of personal confidence. So
well,
I probably get in trouble for saying that, but there we go. That's the cat out of the bag.
I hope yours will be like mine. If mine is any kind of example, I think you'll do very well. And it's amazing how far a compliment can go. How much a word of encouragement can just could make my husband's day or completely destroy him. And so that also took some learning, was to find the right time to correct maybe something that wasn't quite the way it should be.
Mhm.
That took a little, those are growing pains.
Sure.
But I think now that we've been married 34 years and we're
Yeah.
old, it's paying off. We have a really, really lovely life.
I love it. I love it. Very cool. So after Master Tech, which was more on the technology side and professional development, like you said, I learned so much from you in that year that I was working with Master Tech, left the schools and worked with you. And it was a kill what you eat, trial by fire, but it was kind of the gauntlet that I needed to go through to get to the point where I could kind of step into the role that I had with interactive learning. So I thank you so much for those on the job training that really you can't get any other way. So I appreciate the opportunity of working with you and the lessons that I learned and just the mentorship that you gave. It meant the world to me.
Oh, well, it's wonderful to hear you say that. You look back and you wish you could have been more. I wish I could have been a better mentor, or that I had known something more that maybe I know now.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's kind of the timing. We all go through what we need so that we can grow and be better later on and have more wisdom than we had at that moment.
Right. Yeah, it is crazy. If we were talking about right before we hit the record button here that I've actually been in educational technology longer than I was a teacher, which to this day, when I, go to the store and talk to these people, they're like, oh, so which school are you at now? Like, I haven't been in school for like 12 years now. So it's just it's kind of funny that is the identity that a lot of people have. It is what it is, but I agree with you. I think God has an amazing way of putting you through situations at a specific time where it may be difficult, but those are laying the groundwork for future success. And had you not gone through that difficult time, you wouldn't appreciate or have the tools to be able to succeed in later down the road.
Well, you'll appreciate the funny story about my very first professional development delivery.
Okay, let's hear it.
Talk about trial by fire. I knew the content, but it's not like I was all that confident. I know the Bible far more than I know about technology.
Okay, gotcha.
So
fair enough.
that was a niche that I had. It was, very comfortable teaching technology and all that went along with our training. So it wasn't quite as comfortable. Plus, I had never taught a teacher before.
Right. It is different.
It wasn't like I know classroom management in the way that a teacher knows classroom management.
Sure.
I'm used to 100 women in a room for a Bible study actually being respectful and listening.
Right. Yeah, teachers are the worst when it comes to professional development. I love y'all, but it's true. We rag on kids, but man, they're
terrible.
They are. Love you, teachers.
We love you, teachers. I'm committed to working with you, but maybe don't talk when we're trying to teach you.
Maybe follow the same rules that you would apply with your own kids. But anyways,
it's true. Oh yeah, I happened to say something, these three guys just weren't going to stop talking, and I just have that little way of calling them out. Well, you don't want to do that, but it was my first time out.
Right.
I'm lucky I'm alive because that guy, he came up to me on a break and he had me up against a wall. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I think I should have reported him because if he did that to an adult, just imagine how he might be with those high school kids that he had. So,
goodness gracious.
Gee, I hope he didn't do anything bad after that.
Yeah.
But,
wow.
it scared me and it really shook me really hard.
Yeah.
But you mentioned God earlier, and you and I both have a strong faith, and I knew that I was supposed to do that. I was supposed to be there, and it was okay to go through that because I needed to learn about classroom management with adults who weren't being respectful. I didn't know what that looked like, but I learned pretty fast.
Right. Wow. Well, I'm glad you're safe. That's a
me too.
Oh goodness. So let's jump into the literacy world. This is I think you and I ran into each other at a conference. I don't even know, 5 years ago. Yeah. So it was
IRA, I think.
Yeah, I kind of knew a little bit about that, but the 95% group, that's all new to me. So you had mentioned a couple of just stats right before we started that I'm like, oh my gosh, that's something that people should know about. So tell us about what is the biggest issue that you see as far as education in America when it comes to literacy? What are the gaps or the the huge holes that people are maybe not aware of, and what have you been doing to kind of help facilitate for educators to close those gaps?
Sure. I think the biggest gap is the way that our states have no parity across all 50 states. There's one state will understand what we call the body of evidence for this, what we call the science of reading.
Okay.
One state like Colorado has had the READ Act in place since 2013. They understand that there is evidence. We do know how to build the neural circuitry to wire the brain.
Okay.
And other states have no understanding at all and no legislation. I think today in 2024, though, I would say probably all, at least 40 of the 50 states have legislation for science of reading.
Okay.
That's the biggest gap. And it's evidenced by looking at the National Assessment for Educational Progress. When you look at the NAEP scores, right? You'll see that 2/3 of our fourth graders aren't proficient in reading. That's a huge gap.
Yeah.
2/3 of our kids, nobody should be okay with 2/3 of your children not reading. And I would say that's additionally then the gap that I have been fighting against for, a dozen years now.
Right.
Is that leaders will look at maybe state law and kind of comply by getting what we call an evidence-based reading program, but not really know what it means. A principal may not even know what it takes for a child to learn to read. There's such a disconnect. But I have to, send kudos to Colorado because our legislators have enacted the READ Act. They do find funding for our schools.
Okay.
I'll just put an addendum on that, though. I wish instead of the money going to schools that are failing, there was a bump for schools that begin to move their kids into proficiency. That's where I'd like to see some financial benefit, because we're rewarding schools for keeping their kids in basic or non-proficient. It's kind of scary.
Absolutely. And it's absolutely backwards. I mean, from really that makes no sense in the business world. Why would we, support that or promote that in the education world? I'm going to forget the name of the principal, but I just listened to a podcast today of Simon Sinek, and it was about the future of education leadership. I'll have to find it and put it in the notes here. But he asked right at the end, and he said, what is one of your, most proud moments as an education leader? And it was the exact inverse of what you said right there. Rather than rewarding, that's better to say, rather than providing funding for schools that are failing, they were going to, find the teachers that are doing well and they are meeting these metrics, and let's give them a boost, right?
Yes.
And it just, and the thing that she was saying was that seems like that would cause division, right? Well, hey, Dee got her bonus, but I didn't. But if everybody knows, treat it like a education classroom, right? Y'all know the rubric, right? This is what we expect. Right. If you do these, X, Y, and Z, this will get your boost, and then you know what you're shooting for. And then, anyways, it was brilliant. I love that, and it just is a counterintuitive to what education is doing right now. But I think it makes all the sense in the world. So. A little bit of a side note there, but I thought that was an interesting point.
You're right. And speaking of counterintuitive, that's the other biggest gap. Education in our country is counterintuitive to the business world, to anything else out there. And a lot of people have their opinions about standards. I believe that we need to have some standards.
Okay.
Because otherwise, how do you know what proficient looks like? I do need to understand what some of the basic facts are that a child needs to be able to progress in school. I just don't, it's not that even whether I believe it or not, there just isn't enough information about making literacy the
Mm.
number one skill.
Mm.
Because you can trace, there's something called the school to prison pipeline.
Ooh,
Have you heard that phrase?
I have not. Tell me more about that.
Well, this scares me so much. The school to prison pipeline are really the metrics of those men and women that are incarcerated and their level of reading proficiency. And
Wow.
you would not be surprised to find
Yeah.
out that the metrics show an overwhelming majority are not literate. And this is a shame. And also, I just have to bring up inclusion and equity for all children. I have this T-shirt that says literacy and equity for all, right?
Yeah, right.
Because that's what we need.
Mm.
We need for every child to have the opportunity to read. When I think back that our country suppressed allowing educators to teach Black and brown children, they were not allowed to have the gift of reading.
Right.
And some people broke the law and taught Black and brown people to read. And this is, we should not have anything that suppresses that ability, because it's perpetuating a cycle of poverty,
Right.
and failure it's not right. And I want to break that cycle. If I can be a tool to help break that, even in a little way, that's my greatest joy.
I love it. No, that's really good. Another one, and I'm sure this ties into the importance of literacy, and again, maybe one of those blind spots, I guess, for lack of a better term. I think it was when we ran into each other at that conference. You were talking about the gap, or the difference between vocabulary, and how kids, the vocabulary difference between kids that succeed and those that don't, coming into kindergarten or pre-K, is monumental. And that's almost a direct correlation, kind of like that prison to school thing of, like, you can tell almost with a lot of certainty that if a student doesn't have vocabulary, that's going to have a significant effect on where they will end up. How sad is that?
And now, a brief commercial from today's sponsor.
Hey guys, Andy Bennetts, owner and president of Interactive Learning. Our awesome little company has been around for close to 20 years now, and our core purpose and mission is to empower the future of education with innovative solutions through engaging technologies and leadership programs. We are blessed to work with a wide range of markets, including K-12, trades, corporate, and government. Interactive Learning is also proud to serve our nation's JROTC programs with over 3,000 units and 500,000 cadets. For our podcast listeners today, we have a special offer just for you. It's called our Class Tech Discovery Session. This is incredibly helpful for teachers, administrators, tech personnel, really anybody involved in helping students learn with technology. Here's what you get with the Class Tech Discovery Session. It starts with a short Zoom call. We'll talk about your class needs, your wants, desires, really your class wish list of ed tech. Then we'll touch on your timelines and budgets, plus any constraints that your district might be facing. Next, we'll look at new tech and new solutions, the latest and greatest out there that might be applicable to you and your district. And if you're interested, we'll even demonstrate these crazy cool, cutting-edge technologies just for you. Finally, we'll give you an idea of costs and professional development and how we and our team will support you moving forward. Again, that is Interactive Learning's Class Tech Discovery Session. Request your session now by texting Discovery to 970-739-2229 or emailing Discovery to andy@intlrn.com. Request your school's highly informative Class Tech Discovery Session today.
And now, back to the Empowered Learning Podcast.
Remind me a little bit, I guess, of the
Well, we talk a lot about the 20 million word
There you
deficit
go. Yep.
that a lot of children come into school with.
Right.
I mean, today, really, with all of the supports and the internet and everything that's available,
Mm-hmm.
there's really no reason for any child to come to even preschool, let alone
Mm-hmm.
kindergarten, without knowing their letters.
Mm-hmm.
And really, they could know the sounds that those
Sure.
letters make, at least one of those sounds, right?
Right.
But we do have just a large segment of our population that are transient. You may find children popping from school to school, even within a district. Those are some of the struggles that educators have. But it's not enough to say, well, it's that demographic. Well, it's those kids, or well, these are our SPED kids. I just don't believe in putting children in a bucket and leaving them there, because we know today that 95% or more of all humans can learn to read proficiently.
Wow.
So I'm proud to work for a company that is named 95% Group because of that very research fact. And we are seeing amazing gains because we apply what we know from science, what we know about building the reading brain directly into the classroom, and we empower educators to be able to do that. So even though children may come in with those deficits,
Sure.
with the right training, and again, a shout out to Colorado, because again, our legislators updated the READ Act to provide, or to mandate, let's say, because that's how teachers view it. All K-3 teachers are required to have science of reading knowledge, so they needed to go through a training in order to be able to teach K-3, and now it's moving up grades 4 and 5. And what's really exciting is now it's mandated for administrators to take the science of reading.
Okay.
That knowledge applied well with wisdom, right?
Right.
That can change not only individual children's lives, but a classroom, a school, a community, a city. I mean, I see amazing things that can happen when schools come together around literacy and have the right tools and learning in place.
Okay. Wow, that's amazing. So you've used a couple terms here. So just for maybe some readers some listeners that heard that, like, yeah, that makes sense, but I don't know exactly what it is that she's getting at. So tell me, how would you differentiate literacy and reading? I mean, I think for educators, they probably have their own take, but how would you differentiate the two? And then I would love to get just kind of a basic understanding of the science of reading. So those are the two.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for those questions. You know, you can tell this is right up my alley. It is
This is
my passion.
A bunch of softballs for you. Make it easy.
You really are. You know, the way I see reading is getting text off of a page.
Okay.
Being able to just say the words that the letters represent. Okay, that's basic reading. But literacy is much more than just pulling the text off the page. And what I'm setting up is the explanation then of what we've learned about reading and the science thereof. Literacy really involves the ability to understand and comprehend what you've read, because you have some background knowledge in the vocabulary that's used in what you're reading, that you understand the syntax, the way the sentence is set up, who I'm speaking to, who is speaking to me. Are we describing something? Are we telling a story? And then being able to not only then understand what you've read, but literacy involves being able to then write about it so that you can communicate about what you've just read. So literacy is a full scope of all that we get when we read something.
Gotcha. I love it. Thank you. That was exactly what I was hoping for. Wonderful.
Oh,
Okay.
good. Well, now you know why I do what I do.
I had no doubt that you would have a phenomenal answer on that one. All right, so we'll give you your second softball of the day. What about the science of reading? For those that maybe don't know what the Read Act is, or these other
That's
things that
right.
you've mentioned, tell us what the different, or what is the science of reading?
Well, the science of reading is just a body of knowledge. It's not a program or a
Okay.
strategy. It is a body of knowledge that we have garnered over, decades. And a lot of it comes from direct observation of our brains under fMRIs.
Okay.
So that kind of resonance imaging is where they inject, luminescence, I guess.
Yeah,
inside the
I know what you're talking about,
bloodstream.
right? So it shows where it's lighting up.
Yes, the
Yeah.
activity centers
Gotcha.
of the brain. And
Yep.
so through, really tens of thousands of fMRIs, we
Wow.
know what happens and how the brain is wired and how you wire it, those areas. So one thing I like to talk about is the simple view of reading. This is pretty
Okay.
easy for anyone to understand.
Okay.
And we're just going to use a simple multiplication to 1 times 1 equals 1.
Okay.
So 1 would be what I mentioned earlier, getting the text off the page, being able to decode, or what we might say when I was learning how to read, sounding out the words, right? So that decoding piece is one part of it.
Okay.
But the other piece is what I talked about with literacy. It's that language comprehension, all the things that are involved in vocabulary,
Right.
etc.
Right.
So if you have both, you get reading comprehension. But let's take away decoding. 0 times 1. If I can't sound out the words and I can't get the text off the page, what am I going to get?
Right.
0 times 1 is 0. Or if I can decode and sound out words all day long, but I have no idea. And this is what we often see with English language learners, especially Spanish students, come in and they can decode really well, but they have no idea what they're reading. They can tell you the words, they can sound it out, but it's the language comprehension that has to be in place. So otherwise, we don't have comprehension. So what we do is make sure that both sides of that equation are in place. And of course, I can go into a lot more science. We could talk about Scarborough's rope. Dr. Hollis Scarborough has a beautiful illustration that looks like weaving yarns together. And I love that because it's almost what's actually happening in the brain, because as we're firing those neutrons and building new pathways, we really are wiring what we call the neural superhighway in the brain. And it's so exciting when you go into a school and children have just traditionally not been able to read very well. And you start on this path of science-based reading instruction, and they run up to the teacher that you might be talking to and they say, Mr. Bennetts, Mr. Bennetts, I read the story to Mom last night. And nobody's ever read a story in their house before. That makes everything worthwhile. Think about what that does for that child and the confidence that they get, even if it's a simple story. Andy and Dan went to fish. Very simple story. And actually, we wouldn't give that to a first grader because we've got the why, and that's too early for that. But as you see, there's a lot that goes into reading itself before we can ever get to the full gamut of literacy.
I love it. I love it. What was that? Scarborough's what?
Rope.
Rope.
ROPE. Just like, you would braid.
Okay, got it.
The yarns,
the intertwining
pieces
of
the rope. And that's what we're doing with language comprehension and with decoding. So
I love it.
And that's how I learned it, with just early on, a lot of years ago, looking at just different colored pieces of yarn and weaving them together and what each one represented. It makes a great visual representation, but to know that this is literally happening.
Yeah.
So we call teachers, now teachers, I want you to give yourself a new title.
Okay.
If you are an elementary teacher,
Okay.
and you are teaching children to read, I want you to remember that you are a neurocognitive electrical engineer.
Ooh, I like that. That sounds.
That is your
They probably would be
new
getting
title.
paid a little bit more if
There
they
you
were a
go.
neurocognitive electric engineer, right?
That's a new bullet in your
I love
resume.
There we go. New
You know,
title.
when we think of it in those terms, then you'll realize, I mean, teachers often forget how important they are.
They do.
I can sell all kinds of resources, Andy, but the most important resource in that classroom
Right.
is my teacher.
Yep.
And I want them to feel so cherished by us. I want them to know that we're there to support them and help them be successful and help them see their kids be successful.
Right.
So that's a lot of what I think I do and why you can call me a salesperson. Oh, there's the salesman coming. I don't care because I know what I really do now.
There you go. I love it. I love it. That's wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing that, Dee. It sounds like we could probably talk for the rest of the day about all the fun new stuff that you've learned since we were last together here. But for brevity's sake, let's go ahead and wrap up with our 3 key questions that we ask all of our Empowered Learning podcast members. So. And I sprung these on you a little bit. You've only had about half an hour to marinate on this a little bit, but just speak from your heart. So question number 1, Dee, who is the leader that you most admire and try to emulate?
Well, other than Jesus, who is, of course, the person that I want to emulate in my life.
Exactly.
I really have to say Dr. Susan Hall, and probably many of you are not familiar with Dr. Hall, but she is the founder of the company that I have the privilege to work with, the 95% group. Now, she has since retired, but about 20 years ago, well, maybe a little more than that, probably 30 years ago, her own son was diagnosed with dyslexia. And though she was doing very well in the business world, she was so adamant that she wanted to understand, why can't her son read? And why isn't anything that the teachers are doing helping him? And she went back to college. She humbled herself and went back to school to learn, how does the brain learn to read? And once she learned this and went on to receive her PhD, she said, this isn't enough for me to just know for my own son. Teachers need this information. So she began by providing professional learning in these foundational literacy skills and just the basics of reading so that teachers would understand why they have so many kids that are struggling with reading. And from there, what happens next is that when people learn it, then they say, but that's not enough. We don't have time to write our own lessons. We want you to give us lessons. So Dr. Hall had to develop materials. And so, and of course, those tier 2 materials for intervention were then being used in the tier 1 classroom, and they weren't made for that. So it led us to a whole new world. And there we are with one of the fastest growing, and I would say the literacy leader in the United States, but it's growing so fast because I think of their foundation.
That's wonderful.
And so I really admire her.
Yeah, I'll have to do some more research. That sounds very inspirational, and it it sounds like her heart was definitely in the right place, and then now other people are benefiting from her hard work and her passion in that arena. That's wonderful.
Very much so.
Love it. Question number 2, Dee, what learning has most impacted you in the last year? I know that you are a lifelong learner. I definitely I wouldn't say you were the first one that gave me that gift, but I definitely gleaned a lot of that energy from you when we worked together. Is that you're never done learning, whether that's a spiritual thing or in business or whatever. So if you can think back just over this last year, What is the learning that's most impacted you?
Well, thank you for that sweet compliment, Andy. I take that in a lot of humility, but I would say that at 95% group, because we cover all the tiers of instruction. So when you think of RTI or MTSS, the tier 1 classroom, the tier 2 intervention classroom, the tier 3 intensive intervention classroom, I think that the learning around how to help our dyslexic children or our children in special education or heritage language learners has been very impactful for me. You've probably been able to glean from our conversation just that I just don't want anyone to miss out on this gift of being able to read. Every child, all means all. They all deserve it. And our tier 3 children or those placed in special education, I mean, too many times, Andy, it's babysitting and they're not getting learning that can truly impact their lives. So what I can provide for them now with 95% group is so phenomenal. I've actually seen data in a school in which some students were making more than 100% progress towards their annual growth. Now, this is a SPED classroom.
Wow.
I've seen students that made 200, 250, 300% progress towards annual growth. That's unheard of.
That is.
And we can exit them, not only from SPED, but from intervention.
Wow.
So that's impacted me greatly. I have quite a desire to invest a lot more time in bringing this to Colorado.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Very good. Before we go, and this is kind of a cross connection for those listeners, I had mentioned to you before we started recording, Nikki Handy, a friend of mine. She works with a company called Fueling Brains. I think the two of you would really hit it off. I think there's definitely some synergy between what you're doing at 95% group and Fueling Brains. So if you haven't listened to that episode, go back and check that out. And Dee, I will make sure to get you connected with that.
I will indeed. Awesome. I love to collaborate.
I know you do. I know you do. All right. Last question. Being that the name of our podcast is the Empowered Learning Podcast, Ms. Larsen, how would you empower learning for the future generations?
Well, if money were no object.
Right, there we go. Your magic wand. There you go.
That's right. And I could if I could put these resources in the hands of every single educator, whether tier 1, 2, or 3, if I could give them the tools that will move their children into proficient reading, that is what I would do, because nothing else will spell academic success. Nothing has a greater impact than learning to read, first and foremost. You have probably heard the saying that in kinder to first grade, we are learning to read, or kinder to second. Some people say learning to read, but after third grade and beyond, it is reading to learn. So we've left out probably far more than 2/3 of our students over the last 40 years. And then I would go back in time and give all those kids that didn't get the opportunity.
All right. And you use your time machine. Go help
there
them
you
out
go.
Too. I love
time machine and all the money in the world, and we can change the world.
I love it. I love it. I have no doubt that that's exactly what you would do if you had all the money in the world. I love it. Well, Dee, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. It's been wonderful catching up. Say hi to Dan and your boys for me, and let's do this more than every 5 years. How about?
Absolutely. And you hug and kiss Crystal for me and tell those boys hi. It's been a joy. I'm so proud of you.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. It's great to see you again. So
You
have
too.
a fantastic day, and we will talk to you soon.
Thanks so much.
All right. See ya.
Bye-bye.